If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, Forest Rangers, what is the creepiest/strangest experience you've had while on the job? I'm a forester for the U.S. Forest Service in Northern California. I've never had anything like supernatural type creepy happen to me. But it always creeps me out a little bit when I come across a kill site from a mountain lion. When you're by yourself in the woods, you're just another link in the food chain, but you don't really think about it until you come across a half-eaten deer and realize a huge cat killed this thing with its face. As for the strangest thing, that would be the time I thought I was about to see a plane crash. As usual, I was working alone on a remote hillside and I saw a plane, like a full-size commercial plane, flying below the ridgeline between mountains. I thought it was going to crash for sure. But it didn't. It just weaved through and kept going. I thought it was weird it didn't have any logos or writing on it. Come to find out, we were close to an Air Force base and they were training pilots for Afghanistan, and this was not a totally uncommon thing to see in the area. When I was working for a federal government land management agency in Montana a few years back, something really creepy came over the repeater network. While we were working in a canyon that had very poor radio reception, we heard a very long, creepy, and drawn-out moan come over the air. This was followed by a very weak, in both reception and tone, "Help, me," in a woman's voice. All of us freaked the fuck out. These weak cries for help kept repeating low guttural "help me" on until dispatch finally stepped in and said, "This is a federal emergency network. Unless you have an emergency, get off this channel." This was followed by another plea for help, then a gunshot and screaming. Turns out two local crazies were out four-wheeling, going straight up steep embankments, when the ATV flipped backwards, pinning the man under the ATV. Both of them being high on some substance, they started freaking out. The man, being perfectly fine, except for being pinned by the leg and high, started to hallucinate that he was bleeding out, pulled out his handgun and shot himself to make it quicker. Because they were four-wheeling so far back in the sticks, a helicopter was needed to retrieve the body. I'm far from a forest ranger, but I was in Scouts in grade 7. We were camping in an area that was known to contain larger animals, mainly bears and cows. We had set up our tents in a U-shape, with me and a friend's tent on the outside. During the night, I woke up to a really loud rumbling sound. It sounded as if it was right outside my tent, and scared the shit out of me. I woke up my friend and he just went back to sleep. The sound kept on going, so I opted to check things out. I step outside into the cold and look around. Nothing is there, but the rumbling sound continues. I try to find where the sound is coming from, but it seems to be coming from everywhere. Freaked out, I edged a little bit further away from my tent, and realized the source of the sound. I had been woken up by one of the troop leaders snoring. The best thing is that their tent was 6 tents away from mine. I do a lot of solo and deep backwoods camping, have a few interesting stories, but this is the most recent from this fall. Hiking in the mountains in California, set up camp in a nice flat clearing. Second day, I leave the tent and most of the supplies to go on a little day hike to this ridge. Hike gets long and by the time I get back to camp it's dark. That night I hear more animals than I did the previous night. Don't think too much of it, but it's a little weird. Wake up the next morning and find dead animal, deer, remains scattered all over the campsite. I probably missed them when I backed the night before because it was so dark and I just went right to sleep. My guess is a hunter was being a dick and processed his kill around my campsite for some reason, maybe to freak me out. The animals I heard that night were scavenging the kill. Nevertheless, I hightailed it out upon discovery. Not a forest ranger but prior Marine, we were doing amphibious landings and set up to rack out on the beach. I woke up and walked over the sand dune to take a piss in the middle of the night when I saw a squad of recon guys geared up with night vision goggles maybe 10 feet away from me. I said "what the fuck" pretty loudly and none of them said anything. I walked up to one guy and had to physically touch him before he said they were practicing on us. I told my platoon commander about it and the next day he told me they failed because I noticed them. Startled the shit out of me though. I was halfway through my piss before my eyes adjusted enough to notice 10 or so guys just watching it go down. Would have died for sure. My friend and I were going through a more secluded part of the woods off of the trail. We planned to head back soon since the sun was setting and shadows were getting longer. I know it doesn't sound like much, but understand that everything gets creepier when you're surrounded by miles of forest. Then, we noticed it. In the distance was a small wooded platform, a bit rundown. It looked like a man-made structure, completely out of place, and I'd never seen anything like it. I remember we approached with caution and even radioed it in. Apparently, nobody had ever seen it before or knew what we were talking about. We didn't have to get very close, the smell hit both of us like a freight train. I felt like I was going to puke. There are no words to sufficiently describe how foul it was. It was the scent of rotten flesh and death, but millions of times worse. At that point, we were both seriously spooked and decided to leave since it was getting late, plus we'd already reported it anyway. Found out that when rangers checked, they discovered a couple things. First, the scent was actually caused by severely mutilated small animal corpses, ravaged and left to rot around the mysterious platform. Next, they collected several bear set traps surrounding it, even though there are no bears here. They uprooted the platform and found the entire thing was a trap, basically because the boards were weak and a deep pit had been dug underneath it with metal shards waiting at the bottom. Source: USFS Botanist. Haven't had major creepy experiences other than this, but be safe and take proper precautions when you're out there. There are weirdos. Not a ranger, just work with them. Where we are at, mountain lions are a big issue and their numbers were getting too rampant, so we had to call them. The guy was out with his dogs and let them go. They're all GPS tagged and collared, and most went after one lion and the lone dog went the other way. Most of the rangers went after the group of dogs while the other guy had to go get the lone dog. He follows the GPS tracker and stops. It's a cave. He just stared at it and was like, well, my dog is dead. But the state requires him to get proof, so he leaned in to find out. The dog was buried in the snow, still breathing, and the ranger found himself face to face with a cougar. Obviously it attacked, he killed it, they carry weapons after all, and he got his dog out. Last I heard, that dog is still helping treat cougars. Forester here, running into fresh mountain lion and bear scat in tracks is always creepy, but I'm most afraid of other people. I started carrying a gun, which is against my company's policy, after one particularly unsettling run-in. I normally work alone, but on this day I had a coworker with me. I stepped out of his sight for a bathroom break. We were way off the grid, thought we were the only people for miles. All of a sudden I see a man standing motionless about 20 to 30 feet from me. It scared the shit out of me and I scream in obvious terror. He doesn't say a word, and I'll never be able to accurately describe the look on his face. It was pure evil, I could feel his intent. He takes a step towards me, at which point my coworker yells, "Are you okay?" The guy then just turns around and walks away, disappearing back into the woods. I'm a woman BTW, and I know for a fact if I had been alone that day he would have assaulted me. Another creepy one was when I was patrolling in a swamp in SC and my boss just happened to fly overhead in a helicopter while conducting an aerial patrol. I could see him in the copter waving his arms. I'm waving back smiling like, "Hey buddy. I see you." My cell rings and it's my boss telling me to get back in my vehicle, amphibious Argo, because I'm walking towards a 10 to 12 feet alligator. Super creepy because God knows how many I'd been close to in the past. Not a normal day to have a helicopter scouting for me. Strangest thing I've come across was a huge pile of dental molds, like the kind orthodontists make, in the middle of nowhere. About 3 feet high, thousands of fucked up grills. I love weird, random shit, so it made my day. I took like 30 of them and would randomly leave them around town with stupid quotes written on the bottom, kept them stored in the driver's side door so people would be like WTF when they noticed lol. My friend that happened to be a dental assistant saw them one day and explained that they are expensive to dispose of. So a shady dentist just dumped them. Another time I had just stepped out of the woods when a fish dropped from the sky and landed right in front of me. I was super confused until I saw the hawk that was carrying it fly away. And lastly, this one happened to a coworker. He walked past an old metal tub covered by plywood, lifted it to see what was underneath. It was full of dead dogs. People are real shit sometimes. I work as a forester in northern Alberta, Canada. One of the weirder things I found was an old rusted toboggan in an area of forest that had recently been harvested. It had obviously been there before the forest was cut, because it had about 3 inches of soil on top of most of it with plants growing out of it. This was also 15 to 20 kilometers off a highway, and not near any well-used trails or roads. I used to be a ranger for a cave park. One morning, I walked up to our caves to unlock them, as a lot of our caves are gated to protect them from vandalism. As I'm walking up, I feel just weird. I go unlock the cave, and as I head back down I realize that the metal boardwalk under my feet feels and sounds different. I walked up and down it a few times trying to figure out exactly what was different, but no luck. I decide to head back down to our visitor center and ask the first tour of the day to check on it and see if they notice anything. As I'm heading down the stairs I glance back up at the cave, and the great big bloody bear that had been snoozing under the boardwalk sticks his head out. I do a lot of solo hiking and I've seen some weird shit. I actually had a what the fuck moment this weekend. Decided to wake up super early and hike into this a great little fishing spot in Uwharrie National Forest. Now I am probably a good 8 to 10 miles from anything or person. As I come over this hill, I see a hoodie hanging up about 25 feet in a tree and an axe head at the base of the tree. The hoodie was on a branch that couldn't have been thrown or even placed up there if someone climbed. The limb would have snapped. I just took the safety of my pistol and kept walking. Nothing you can really do that far out. I worked as a botanist for the Park Service. As a scientist, you still wear the uniform. My field partner and I were surveying some plants and a super old dude walks up. We chat a bit and he tells us he's in his 80s and been hiking there forever. He seems pretty tough and with it from the conversation. Cut to an hour or two later, he's on his way back, but his pants have disappeared and he's just wearing a, thankfully, long tank top, no pants or underwear. He waves and keeps going. Since you can only be cited for being naked in parks if someone complains, we wave and continued surveying plants. Never really figured out what happened, maybe in restroom emergency or he just wanted to feel the breeze. Not a ranger, but did a lot of camping and hiking in my 20s. Worst story for me was when 3 bears entered our campsite at like 2 o'clock in the morning when we were sleeping in a tiny little tent. Pitch black outside, but we were high up the mountain, so when laying in the tent, you could see the moonlight filtering through the thin plastic of the tent and the silhouettes of the trees and stuff. So my friend and I were in one tent and the guys were in another tent a few feet away from us. We are awoken to banging sounds in the campsite, about 3 or 4 feet from where we are laying. We both looked at each other and held hands because it was loud. I was terrified to move because the sleeping bags would make that rustling sound if we moved. I swear to God, the bears were fascinated with our tent. Now, we did go through all the hassle of setting up a bear-proof camp, even washing the sunscreen off of us, putting food and self-care items and chapsticks and stuff in the food canister and such. We did everything we knew to do so that we did not smell good to bears, but I think just camping that far up gets their attention, period. These things literally were making grunting noises, throwing items around the camp, and rubbing themselves along the side of our tent. Like I could hear the sound of their bristled fur rubbing against the side of our tent over and over and over. I will never forget that sound. When I would open my eyes and look up, you could see their huge grunting silhouette rubbing against the side of the tent. It was like the scariest 30 minutes of my entire life. 3 gigantic bears were a mere inch away from me, and the only thing that separated us was the thin plastic of the tent that they could shred in half a second. After what seemed like an eternity, they wandered away, and the guys came flying into our tent carrying the gun. We huddled there, all 4 of us like terrified schoolgirls, until the sun came up. When we took a look at the camp, everything that had been sitting out, mostly bags and clothes and non-food item stuff, was destroyed and scattered. I never went camping again after that experience. It terrified me. Before that, I never really thought what was out there. Now I know. I'm not a ranger, but I do have a story about the woods out behind my house. I've only ever lived one place in my whole life. I lived with my family up on a mountain in rural Alabama. Like, really rural. Around our house you could walk 2 or 3 miles in any direction and not find any sign of civilization except for the road leading up to our house. Just trees, leaves, and pine straw. So just a 3-mile radius of private woodland. Anyway, one night when I was probably about 15 or 16, I had a lady friend at my house who I desperately wanted to impress. So I decided it would be cool to go walk out to my favorite spot in the woods. In hindsight, I know I shouldn't have done it, but the spot was my ace in the whole lot. It was super romantic. Fireflies and the sound of a small stream, the whole shebang. She seemed tentative at first because she was smart, but ultimately caved to the thought of adventure. So we start walking down the path I had cut out. I've got my lantern because I couldn't find the flashlight, so I couldn't really see too far out in front of me, but it was enough to see the path. So it's about a 10 or 15 minute walk, and about halfway through there was this kinda distant weird buzzing sound. It was hardly loud enough to interrupt our talking, but it was definitely there whenever there was a break in talking. At first I really didn't think much of it. The woods can be a really loud place at night with all the bugs, and it was getting to be spring. So I pretty much ignored it. Then after a bit of walking it was definitely getting to be more and more pronounced. Eventually my friend asked me if I heard it too, and after I confirmed it she was adamant about turning around and just going back. I agreed just to make her comfortable, but as we were going back the noise just kept getting louder, and eventually as we were almost back it was clear what the noise was. The sound of someone playing a harmonica had been gaining on us in the dark the whole way. By the end of it we were running pretty much full speed out of the woods across the yard and straight into the house. We went up to one of the windows facing the yard, hit the light and cracked the windowsill to listen. It was still out there, playing its harmonica. And we listened to it pass the house and fade into the pines. By far the most surreal, horrifying experience of my life. Probably my most cherished memory too, because that girl ended up being the one that got away. Don't know if I can comment, but I have a lame little story. Every summer I work on a national park just to get a little extra cash for college. So last year I decided to say fuck it and solo a 7-ish mile hike up the mountain to get back to my dorm. This is after having a few days off, and instead of being late the next day waiting for a ride, I decided I was gamed enough to venture the forest at night. So here I am alone crossing makeshift bridges, and going along a makeshift trail in the middle of an pitch black evergreen forest. Along the way I come to a small rocky river bank. I look up and see a blood moon looming overhead. For some reason I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me, like I just fucked up big time. Hours pass, in turn with me getting lost and my flashlight dying. I kept seeing a shadowy figure in my peripheral, pointing to something. Wasn't a good time, as I was already on the lookout for bears and mountain lions, plus being exhausted. I'm not a park ranger, but I've done a lot of work out in them. For 5 years I was commissioned to install staircases as part of an art installation. It was about the destruction of our environment for the need of our ever-expanding need for homes. We did hundreds of these things in various states of decay. Some looked new, some we tried to make look hundreds of years old. Don't think they ever took them down, so if you ever see them now you know why. Totally safe to walk up to, great views from the top. As a forest worker I actually have few creep you out stories. The biggest one was in northeastern BC, up near the Alberta border about as far north as Fort Nelson, but no summer roads because it is a giant swamp up there. We flew in with a helicopter and 2 of us girls got dropped in a block. The helicopter dropped us all first thing in the morning and was coming back in the afternoon because he had another job in the middle. So my partner goes one way to one end of the block and I head to the far end to start so we can work towards each other. I get down there and doing my thing and suddenly I hear screaming, yelling, swearing and just a lot of bad. All in a female voice. Now the lady I worked with was not a swearing person and I had never seen her angry, and this person was angry. I tried yelling back to see what was wrong. No actual answer. Then my partner radios me to find out what is wrong as she can hear this on the wind. I had to explain to her it was not me either. We decided to work together that day. It never quit until the helicopter came back and dropped off a load of our guys to help us finish up our block. Just before they landed we heard a couple of quads speed away in the bush. We ended up with about 15 people on that block to finish it. The helicopter flew around to find the person to see if they were in need of help, but could not even see a trail out of the block. The roads were through pure muskeg swamp and not even passable by foot due to standing water and quick mud. And saying that one is my creepiest I have even been shot at, had a pack of wolves track me for hours after killing something in my block, been stalked by bears, and found dead animals including the one that was gutted and dropped so close to the driver's door of our truck we had to crawl in from the passenger side. And my poor coworker that I had to phone the RCMP for one day as he came back to the office freaked out because he found a couple of pairs of skeletal feet in running shoes one day. Turned out after some investigation someone had shoved bear paws in shoes, which just begs the question why. At least they were not human. This was in BC at the start of the feet washing up on shore on the coast too. Not a ranger, but have spent much time in the forest. My father worked for the US Forest Service. I was a kid in the 50s, 60s, pre-cell phone, a lot fewer people and much less development. I have never feared animals at all, except for being stalked by a large group of foxes would welcome any paranormal stuff, but it never happened. What is scary is weather, the sudden harshness of cold, wind and rain, causing floods, slides and being lost. That can kill you in an instant. I have so many stories about delivering mail, but this is a shorter one. I was out in a residential neighborhood and as I was driving up the street, not a walking route, I see a customer waiting by his mailbox. I got to his house, said hello, and he told me that he was expecting a package to arrive today. I said, yes, you do. I have it right here. It was in a large padded envelope and I attempted to scan the package but the barcode wouldn't scan for some reason. I felt bad BC I kept trying to get it to scan, and it wouldn't scan. I apologized, told him I would have to type the number in my hand. As I'm typing he says, the package is not actually for me. It's for my wife. She went to one of those parties for adults. And then he suddenly got really embarrassed and started laughing nervously. I look again at the package and realize that through the padding is a large, dense object, shaped like a cylinder. I'm holding his wife's dildo. I think I said sarcastically, wow. I'm really happy for your guys, and drove to the next box. Not a ranger, just a camper. I went with my family too. I was little so don't remember everything, Utah, and we camped in the woods on a campsite. We had a lot of food stored in the back of our camper and one night the entire camper was shaking. My dad woke up and looked out of the window. He didn't see anything and went to the back, There he opened the window and directed his flashlight downwards. There was a bear, enormous, from his perspective. Bear had opened the back end. He got scared, closed the windows and called the ranger. The bear left after a few minutes. But there was more. The next morning, we found out that the bear apparently had opened our food locker. They exist to keep bears out of your food, but we didn't lock it, where food of us was stored, but more importantly food of people that were about to go on a hiking trip of multiple days and had too much food for one locker, and they asked if they could use ours. So we screwed them. Here's my forest story. I'm gonna keep it short and sweet, and I'm no ranger, but it's interesting reading these and I want to contribute. Be me 2 years back, living in a remote part of BC. I grew up in Toronto, so not having much experience with the wilderness and didn't know some of the smarter things to do with going on solo adventures. So I had a few days off and the water levels were really low, so I decided to go on a hike. The place I was living backed into Strathcona Provincial Park, and it has to be the most beautiful place I have ever witnessed. So the first day I make it about 2 hours into the bush and I get this strange feeling of unease. Now let me say, if you're out in the woods and you get this feeling, go with it. You're more in tune with nature being around so much of it. So being the city boy that I am, I went back down trail to my car and went home. That evening I was kicking myself that I was a little bitch. I should be a man. I should push past my fears and see nature in its purest form. The next day I'm gonna go double the distance. I'm gonna make it to the top of the mountain. I'm gonna fucking do this. So without telling any of my friends, I went back to the edge of the park with a bag full of food and set off. I got to this section of weird feelings the day before, but this time I felt nothing. The water level was really low and I could walk along this lake where you usually couldn't access. I wasn't following a map and I was just enjoying the feeling of exploring and solitude. That when I got to this mouth of a glacial river. It wasn't warm enough to swim across and I had to cross it somehow, so I left the safety and openness and started up into the woods to find a place to cross. About 20 minutes upriver and into the bush, I noticed this insanely thick fog like a foot off the ground. It was so dense and nothing like I ever had noticed before. I started swishing it around and it was honestly like a dream come true. Like it was so strange the weight it just sat on the forest floor. Mind you, this was the daytime and while dark under the forest canopy. It wasn't spooky. That's when my logical brain kicked in and I realized what was happening. I look a foot to my left and see where the fog was coming from. The forest floor, once the fog was pushed away from my hands, was actually massive logs on the ground running lengthwise, all perpendicular to each other. Such perfect placement in the woods is not something you want to see. A split second later I noticed the fog was coming from chimney out of the ground. The fog was smoke and to this day it was scentless. I swear scentless. It was billowing out of a pipe in the log, and that's when it hit me. I was in the middle of the bush in a normally inaccessible area and I trying to was standing on top of a hidden underground house. I cautiously said hello while looking left and right for signs of a camp, and while hearing no response but some movement underneath, I ran so fucking fast. Words cannot describe how my brain and body was functioning. I don't think I could have ever ran that far distance without stopping normally. It was so weird and hard to rationalize where I was, or what could have happened. Once back to my car. It was straight out of a horror movie. I was in the ignition and it wouldn't start. More scared and in cell phone reception, I called my homies in tears and told them to come help me. 40 minutes later they arrive and I'm high smoking the BC bud sitting by the lake and the fear of everything had gone. We popped the hood and one of the connections to my battery terminal was disconnected. It could have been the bumpy road, but I don't know. In the following weeks, I hike to the opposite side of the lake and with binoculars locate the river and watch it for movement, and nothing. A month later we get some heavy rains and a man's body is found in the dam that had been pushed around in the whitewash for a few days. He's a homeless man that had been living in the woods. I take a few friends back to the spot later in the summer to discover the logs are moved away and a very small pit is underneath. But no signs of a camp. I'm relieved what or whoever was there is gone, but at the same time no one believes to me what happened. A coworker's boyfriend in earlier months vanished in that same forest. Just found his car on the edge of the woods, but he never was found. I feel that something was watching me that first day. I don't know who, but since then I've never had the same feeling of primal fear wash over me in the woods. I am very lucky, whatever was under those logs in that underground hut didn't answer back. I learned that day to always hike with someone else. Tell people where you are going, and most of all, if you see a strange fog on the forest floor, don't play with it. Oh, and drugs are bad. Not a forest ranger, but I work parks that are considered wildlife reserves, some up to over 150 acres of land. One of the parks I work at has a lot of small critters and wildlife running around, like possums, raccoons, foxes. Stuff like that. At night, however, I have no idea what lurks in the woods in some areas. The creepiest thing is coming into work when it's still dark out and flashing lights into really dark areas and seeing sets of eyes staring back at you. We also have to clean up animal carcasses a lot of the time. So we have this remote area where about 9 turkey vultures hang around. We take the carcasses to their area and within days they're picked clean. We call that area the boneyard. For the most part though, it's an awesome job. I also have stories about strange or gross stuff being found in bathrooms we have to maintain. People are by far more disgusting than the wildlife I've encountered. Me and a coworker was patrolling the forest on graveyard shift. We must have been miles away from the station when it happened. He was bitten by a vampire squirrel and became a vampire squirrel himself. Now there's one more thing we have to worry about creeping around out there. Got to hang lots of garlic to keep away old Steve. My dad spoke to a Chinese woman who lived as a forest survey person up in the mountains for the past 30 or so years. This is in Canada about 5 years ago. As an unofficial sort of person the government asked about when looking for forest fires, any sort of illegal shit, etc. She says that she's spotted multiple Sasquatch and that they are quite intelligent and just don't want to interact with people, not even the young ones, but if she's out there they're pretty chill about it because she grew up around that area and remembers seeing them from a young age. She had a totally straight look on her face, and my dad said she's one of the most rational people he'd seen out there. He owned a strip of gold claim out that way at the time and she said if he knew what was good to leave that land alone because digging it up would disturb a lot of shit in the area and she wasn't sure it was a good idea. My dad wasn't so sure until he swears, up and down, he saw one himself, and she said that's the female one and just went inside and left him out there to take the fuck off running. Not a park ranger but worked in a forest for a couple of years. I think it was when I was volunteering before I was given a job my boss, another volunteer and I were out in a more groomed part of the forest for public use. There had been a school group earlier and one of us notices a hoodie on one of the benches. I would have ignored it but my boss said we should take it with us, someone might come back for it. We go over, boss picks it up, looked at the outside, some sport team logo, checks the tag for a name, maybe a parent wrote one, nope. Boss says nice shirt, shame a kid would forget it like this and is checking out the material looking it over then she yells and drops it. What? Look in the sleeve. I pick it up and look in hundreds of spiders. I guess that thing had been there for a while, explains why it was big for a kid. Creepiest thing that happened to me. Not a forest ranger but I used to live in a very rural area in my youth and when I had just turned 18, I was helping with a family friend's security company. It was October, about 9 p.m. and we had just starting the night shift of patrolling what was once a manor house. A little backstory on this place, rumor had it that the house was cursed and haunted by demons and tortured souls alike. In the time it had been standing it had been a simple place of residence, hotel, hospital, nursing home and was eventually left abandoned and derelict in the late 60s. In the 40 years it was abandoned, it had been broken into by kids and gangs and had occasionally been set on fire, all wanting to see this curse for themselves or believed it enough to want the place gone. I didn't buy the whole haunting thing but the place certainly made me feel a little uneasy. Back to the story, it was dark, like it always is at that time at the end of October. It was also cold. And usually the lights around the garden kept it light enough that we could see what we were doing without the need for torches. That was when the lights went out. All of them. That was weird but not to worry, we had the flashlights on our phones. But our phone screens were flickering. Okay, that was super weird. And if it stopped there I probably would have gone home believing that there was some sort of issue with the electricity in and surrounding the house. Some areas are like that, especially in rural places. I live in a rural area now and all the lights blow out and flicker a lot because the electrics just aren't that great. I wish I could say it stopped there. We heard screeching coming from the house. It didn't even sound human. I can't even describe it but it was enough for your stomach to drop like the floor just collapsed beneath you and make your blood curdle. And for what must have been a solid 30 seconds the inhuman screeching was accompanied by unintelligible whispers closer to us and the occasional shadow depicting various acts of suicide and self-mutilation. When we all determined that we did indeed experience what had just happened we called the police about the disturbance and hightailed it out of there as soon as they arrived. No evidence of there being anyone in the house was found, no signs of a break-in, nothing. Our team of 4 people were the only people on the property. I haven't set foot in there since, however the other guys did and as far as I'm aware, they never had an incident like that since. I'm not a forest ranger, but a native Alaskan who grew up in the sticks. Once I was out hunting with an uncle. Well, I was there anyways, I was 8 at the time. We had been trying to find a small moose for quite some time that we'd seen take off into the forest across a field. Everything seemed normal, except that the area was very quiet. Then again, we're two humans walking about, so we figured maybe the wildlife was just being cautious. Well, eventually we caught up to it, at another clearing, and my uncle decided to take a shot as it was getting later and we needed to get it skinned, gutted and butchered before the sun went down. He hit it in the heart and it only managed to stumble maybe another 60 feet to the edge of the forest. I complimented his shot, and we grabbed our gear and walked over. Now, before I tell you this next part, keep in mind that moose are weighed in the thousands of pounds, generally. We're getting closer, and my uncle can't see the moose anymore. Weird, because we'd seen it fall, and we knew it had been hit mortally. We get to the location and the thing is just gone. My uncle starts to enter the forest and all my hair suddenly raised on my entire body and I made a whimper. I'm not a wuss, but I had a bad feeling. My uncle looks at me, annoyed and confused, and just maybe 30 feet away we hear heavy breathing. First thing we think is grizzly, so he pushes me behind himself and gets his gun ready and shouts as loud as he can. I don't know what it was, but it dropped the fucking moose from at least a couple feet off the ground. We know because we heard the loud thud, and tears off running the other direction. It is dark in the understory so we don't see much, but my uncle decides the thing can have the moose. We weren't about to stick around to find out what could lift a whole moose into the air and carry it. 10 years as a USFS forest ranger here. A little late to this party, and not even sure where to start, as a decade will leave you with countless stories. But I've nearly seen it all. A couple of my favorites both involve fire patrol during the summer months when we were enforcing fire restrictions. The first was a dude at a beautiful area, camped next to a lake. About 100 feet from his camp was a giant reflective yellow sign that read "No camping or fires within half mile of the lake." When approached and asked if he'd seen the sign, he admitted that he saw it. Puzzled, I asked why he was camping there, and why he had a campfire. He replied that he figured he was half from the lake, so he should be fine. I kicked a stone into the water, and informed him that he was only about 10 feet from the lake, and I was going to need his ID, as I was going to issue him a citation. Another time, also on a late night fire patrol, we drove past a designated day use/picnic area. This particular area had fire pits, benches, restrooms, water. It was well developed. Right outside the picnic area was this old trail that led to a bridge site where the bridge was removed. Due to this, we had placed a carcinite signpost, slender brown fiberglass post for informative stickers/trail markers/warnings. This particular post had stickers on it that said "area closed/no fires/stay on designated trails" and an American flag at the bottom. We roll up to a raging fire at this site. Fire so big and so close to the carcinite sign, that my stickers are literally bubbling and starting to melt due to the heat. Pretty angrily I asked who wanted to be responsible for this blatant violation. The oldest guy there says he'll take responsibility for the party, follows me to my truck and proceeds to give me his ID. In his police badge holder. He was a local police officer. I was floored. I gave him a stern lecture about reading signage and ultimately damaging government property. Endless stories though. Suicides, ATV accidents, bear attacks, very sad, far too many Boy Scout violations to count, poachers, murders, public nudity, sex in public, underage, everything you can imagine, life flight helicopters, forest fires and air tankers, fire crews. Enough said there. But all in all, I truly miss the million-acre office. The woods, the trees, animal encounters, the occasional well-informed forest visitors, and the endless views, vistas and sunsets. Getting paid to hike, mountain bike, dirt bike, motorcycles, snowmobile, jeep, and play outside for 10 years was clearly something I'll never forget. So we're at this camper near the Dover Lights in Arkansas. It's not the fanciest campsite, but we managed to find this guy that spent a lot of time out there, as much as legally allowed, while also working, and apparently making a lot of cash, so he just vacations in the woods half the year. The guy offers to let my friend watch the place while he goes to visit his son. My friend automatically invites me and some other people to come hang out, and we spend a few days there drinking, smoking, fishing. All in all pretty okay, until my female friend gets super drunk and barges outside in the middle of the night buck naked to eat beans by the handful out of a cold pot. As someone who admires cleanliness, I follow her out and try to make sure she doesn't hurt herself while everyone else just laughs. So there she is, covered in beans, and I'm trying to convince her to settle down and clean herself off with a towel when suddenly her head shoots up like a deer in headlights. She just glares at the trees around us, we're alone and it's pitch black, before literally growling and then sprinting into the woods. I have no fucking idea what to do. I've completely lost sight of her and she's naked in the woods by herself. A few failed attempts to call out to her, and I do the stupidest thing I could have done by following her. About 5 meters into complete darkness, I look down and see a faint light from someone's phone. Picking it up, I see it's in camera mode, and there are pictures of us, very recent pictures, all in creepy night vision mode, with some looking like they were taken from the window of the camper, and the last one is of my friend running directly towards the camera. Realizing what happened, I delete the pictures and drop the phone on a rock, crushing the screen with my foot. Still unable to find her and freaking out, I double back to the camper for help, only to find her still very drunk in a lawn chair naked. Carrying her back inside, I let her BF towel her off, and they both pass out spooning on the bottom bunk. I never told them what really happened, and she didn't remember in the morning. But I did lock the door and wake up every hour just to keep an eye on things. A fish and wildlife officer told me that one time they got dispatched to a house on an Indian reservation in northern Canada. They were told that a guy was complaining of a Bigfoot shaking his trailer. They went there and they came upon some elders of the reservation brushing off and hiding tracks with branches. They consider the Bigfoot as a spiritual creature. They have stories from back in the old days of run-ins with them. They are even on old totem poles. I also worked with a guy who reenacted fur trade days at old forts. He would get dressed up in his little Davy Crockett costume and act in front of school kids and such. He knew everything about Canadian history and said that back in the old days Indians talked about creatures that lived in the rivers, and they drew pictures to show what they looked like, and they drew crocodiles. Obligatory, not a ranger. There's some mountains behind a small town near where I used to work in the Arizona desert. One night, a good friend of mine and I decided to say fuck it and actually hike up the mountain after work. Since I used to work mid-shift, this takes place at like 1 in the morning. I know, I'm an idiot. Anyway, we stay up there and have a real bro-to-bro conversation about the past. While he's telling me about his ex, I swear, even to this day, I heard someone whisper right into my ear. I asked him if he had whispered anything, and he declined. I just shook it off as weird. About an hour later, he interrupts me and has me turn around. I see nothing. I look back and ask him, "What?" He said he saw what looked like an orange fuzzy ball that moved quickly before disappearing. This really freaked him out, but even with my previous whisper experience, I thought it was just Mother Nature playing games. Anyway, we finally decide that it's time to go, and just as we got to my truck is when things got super weird. I sit down, open the passenger side door for my friend, and I see what I can only describe as an orange fuzzy ball floating very quickly to the left. It disappeared once it got behind my friend. At the same time I witnessed this, my friend, who is an emotionally tough guy, begins screaming his lungs out. He literally hops into my truck, and tells me to get the fuck out of there. I tell him about the fuzzy ball once we leave, and he just goes, "Huh?" He then goes on to tell me that after I opened the door, he looked down and saw, and I quote, "shadowy dog-like legs underneath the truck, as if it was laying down." We both nervously chuckle it off, and that's when I noticed the time. 3:14 a.m. The witching hour had just passed. I never believed in it beforehand, but that experience has made me rethink it. By far the creepiest thing that's happened to me while in the woods. I grew up in a pretty rural area, and there was a gravel pit in the woods a few towns over that I used to camp at with my buddy, drink beer and enjoy a nice bonfire. One summer night we were there drinking and shooting the shit, and it was about 2 or 3 a.m. The fire lit our immediate area, but beyond the ring of light it was essentially pitch black. We were dicking around as kids do and throwing our empty beer bottles out into the darkness, smashing them on the rocks out in the pit and generally being rowdy. The third or fourth bottle I arced really high and far, and after I threw it I waited for the smash. But there was no smash, or thump, or any noise at all. I remember we looked at each other kind of drunkenly confused, and then out of the darkness the beer bottle came whipping back up at us and smashed on the rocks near our tent. As drunk as I was, I remember how surreal the moment was, the strange sinking feeling in my stomach and rising panic. We got in his truck and sped out of there as quickly as we fucking could. Never even went back there to retrieve our tent. Not a forest ranger, just the occasional hiker. I was with my girlfriend in upstate New York in New Windsor, I think. Really small trail, probably 45 minutes to complete the whole thing. But ran into some real creeps towards the end. In the middle of the trail there's this watchtower you can climb in above the tree line. My girlfriend and I climb it and spend about 10 minutes up there. Then we hear some footsteps on the ladder. I look down, and there are 2 young men climbing up with machetes slung across their back. I don't panic, but my girlfriend starts freaking out. We are completely alone in the middle of this trail, just us 2 and our new visitors. Now, the watchtower viewing area at the top is maybe 20 square feet, so not a whole lot of room for 4 people. So I have my girlfriend standing behind me while these 2 guys come up and are acting all casual. Not a word is said for a couple minutes as these two young guys are just casually looking out above the tree line. I decide to break the silence and ask them what they're doing out here, and one of them says, "We come out here pretty often looking for people." His tone was trying to be intimidating, but I could just tell that it was somewhat fake. Either these two guys were just trying to scare us, or they were toying with us. I replied with a joke, "Oh, you must have hid the bodies really well." And everyone except my girlfriend, who is still behind me, laughs. We spend a few more minutes up there. I am getting pretty nervous because no words are being said. All I'm doing is watching their hands to see if they make a move for their machete. Then, they both make their way down the watchtower. Not a goodbye. Nothing. My girlfriend and I watch them run off of the trails and into the woods. We discuss how weird it was. And how they were just trying to scare us. We decide that we are going to climb down and sprint our way to the car. We wound up getting to the car and getting out of there. As we are driving, my girlfriend tells me that she actually knew one of the kids. They went to the same high school. I was about 20 at the time, she was 22. She tells me how he was one of those kids that was weird and got bullied in school and all those great attributes that you hope to see in a guy with a machete in the middle of the woods. And how my girlfriend was one of the people who bullied him. Fucking creepy. Okay, listen up, my friend told me this. They were in a cabin that had bars around the windows. I was right above them upstairs asleep. They were cuddling or having sex when they saw a leg suddenly start hanging from a tree. This was about 2:30 a.m. A tiny Indian man jumps down from the tree. He grabs the bared fence and just stares at them. Blank face staring. My friends were just staring at him back in shock. They said it was so scary. How long was he in that tree? Was he watching them having sex? Anyways, they debated to call the cops, but they would get in huge trouble for being in each other's rooms. After about 10 minutes of this fucking creep staring at them about 5 feet away, just a bared fence and a screen in between them, he unbuttons his pants, pulls his $D out and takes a piss. And disappears into the darkness of unknown. Not a ranger, but with 3 friends, let's call them Ed, Bobby, and Drew, we did decide to canoe down a river in the wilderness, expecting to have fun and witness the area's unspoiled nature. Ed and Bobby are experienced outdoorsmen, while the rest of us are novices. It all started well, but soon our group of 2 canoes are briefly separated, with Ed and Bobby getting stranded on the riverbank. They encounter a pair of local men with a shotgun, who force them into the woods at gunpoint. Ed is tied to a tree, while Bobby is forced to strip and is raped by one of the men while being forced to squeal like a pig. As the men prepare to sexually assault Ed, I sneaks up and kill the rapist with an arrow from his recurved bow while the other escapes. After a brief but heated debate between me and Drew about whether to inform the authorities, the group vote to side with my recommendation to bury the dead man's body and continue on as if nothing had happened. We continue downriver but encounter a dangerous stretch of rapids, during which Drew suddenly falls into the water and disappears. The rest of us crash our canoes into rocks, which results in me breaking my leg. I know what a day. Persuaded that Drew was shot by the rapist's partner and we are now being stalked, Ed climbs a nearby rock face with the bow while Bobby stays behind to look after me. Ed hides out until the next morning when the stalker appears on the top of the cliff with a rifle. Ed clumsily shoots and kills the man, while accidentally stabbing himself with one of the spare arrows. Ed and Bobby weigh down the body in the river to ensure it will never be found, and repeat the same with Drew's body, which we encounter downriver. Upon finally reaching a small town, we took Lewis to the hospital. Now time to carefully concoct a cover story for the authorities about Drew's death and disappearance being an accident, lying about our ordeal to the sheriff in order to escape a possible double murder charge. The sheriff clearly doesn't believe us, but has no evidence to arrest us and simply said to never to come back, to which we agree. We vow to keep their story of death and survival a secret for the rest of their lives. Later on, Ed had a nightmare in which a bloated human hand rises from the lake.